Okay, good evening. We will start to get good habits at 6 o'clock. And one word before I begin. I want just to tell you that this series of lectures on landscape painting in Canada is offered both to the general public and to the student of Concordia. So that's my trick, of course, to get so many people. It's full of students here. And we must be grateful for the museum to have organized this, and I thank them very much. So we will begin the topic of tonight. And maybe some of you were there last week, so I spoke of the group of 7. So I continue a little bit on this subject tonight, but especially by speaking of Lawren Harris production, Lawren Harris works. And I thought of beginning this presentation by telling you a story, or if you want, a kind of myth. Maybe at first sight you will not see too much a connection with Harris, but you will get used to that with me. But I will try after to show you why I think it's very relevant to what I say. The myth I want to quote is not coming from any so-called primitive society. It's written by one of the great thinker, philosopher, politician even of Italy of the 18th century, Giambattista Vico. And he wrote a book which is called The New Science, in which, like many others at this time, like Rousseau did that also, like many others, tried to imagine how the beginning of humanity was and how, what was the first humanity, how they behave. Of course, they didn't have the knowledge we have today about prehistoric man and things like that. So they worked through imagination, through kind of hypothesis. And indeed, at first sight, it looks like a real myth. He says that after the Great Flood, there was 200 years that was spent, and during that time, the forest covered all earth. There were forests everywhere. And in the midst of these forests were living very brutish type of people. He called them giants. And these giants were without family, really. They got born and then left like this, and they were living more or less from the forest, eating some fruits and drinking water. That was it. And having no mores whatsoever, no way to behave, you see, making love with anyone. Reading this, I thought of the film Quest of Fire, you see, a little bit. Maybe some of you have seen it. This type of atmosphere, a little bit. A forest everywhere, and these giants like this, living very brutishly, let's say. And after 200 years, Vico says that suddenly some emanation came from the earth, and there was some combustible element, some element that could be put in fire, went to the sky, and then suddenly there was thunders and lightning. Of course, this is before the Franklin experiment about the discovery of electricity and all that. So to explain thunder and lightning, they have this idea that some fire went up and could fall down on us. So these giants who have lived in forests up to now were very surprised to hear this noise and become to look through the foliage of the forest. They never see the sky before. You see, the forest was so dense that they didn't pay attention to it. So they become to open it a little bit and to see what was, from where this noise and this fire was coming. And they projected more or less, Vico explained, their own structure, you see in this, and they imagined that there was a huge human being there, being probably angry at them for maybe their bad manners. I could imagine they suddenly become a little bit conscious of what they were doing. And they says they invented this way, Zeus or Jupiter, if you want. They realized that this must be a kind of superhuman being, maybe a god, if you want. And then they discover, Vico says, like in any myth, you see, you always tell a story at the beginning, but it's to explain really some aspect of your present actual life. They discovered that with religion, since there was God who could communicate with them through signs, through this lightning, through this thunder, and that you have to understand, and also the beginning of morality, because if God is angry, we have to appease him, we have to behave better, and suddenly religion and morality was starting that way. And the third thing, it was also a beginning of language, because before the giants didn't need to speak. They were living alone, isolated in the forest, you see, going here and there. But there was at least a sign language from God by thunder, by lightning, and the beginning of the idea that we should try to understand what he's telling us and communicate with them, do things. And so Vico suddenly is explaining more or less the essence of culture, we would say today. But the big thing and the big intuition, and I think what is so fantastic, it is that he linked the discovery of religion to more or less the abolition of the forest. These two things go together, and this is a fantastic intuition, because it's not clear at all at first sight, that it is by destroying the forest that you could see the sky and then start culture. So this hatred we have in the Western world toward the forest, how to explain otherwise that we destroy it so much and that we don't give a damn of it, and even if we're told by ecologists, all that, be careful, this is the lung of Earth and all that, nevertheless we destroy it. It seems to be, according to Vico, linked to this any type of religion in which you put God or divinity, let's say, in heaven, or in any cosmic type of infinity, or in the stars, whatever the interest you have in this big sky, then you have to remove the forest, because the forest becomes an obstacle to the communication with the gods. Okay, I told you this is a myth, this is a story. I have no way to know if it was like this that religion was invented. But I think there's a profound intuition there that all religion who put the divinity in the sky, in the heavens, in the cosmic order, in a way could also be negative about the forest, because the forest is what become an obstacle, if you want, to communicate with the gods. And you will tell me what it has to do with Harris. I was struck when I read that by the fact that you do have paintings by Harris who seems to illustrate what I'm just telling you. In 1921, he did a trip with Jackson, with A.Y. Jackson, in the north shore of the Superior Lake. It's one of the great lakes there. And he didn't make too much sketches on the spot there, but he was very, very struck by the type of landscape he found there. And you have the impression that it have created in Lawren Harris' mind at the time, well, that's it. Finally, I find the type of landscape I want to deal with. And you do have a series of these pictures like this one. The title are not very explicit, if you want. They're just Lake Superior, North Shore, or this one is of 1924 and is at the AGO, at the Art Gallery of Ontario. But it's very typical. So what do you see? You see basically in the foreground dead trees. Not only you have trees in the foreground, because we saw that at the last lecture, but here they are dead. They are not, they are just poles, I would say, like this, in the foreground. And then you have this huge sea, even with sometimes a kind of slight circle to give an idea of the immensity of this place. And finally, what is more important here, the sky. The sky with the clouds, sometimes with the clouds who are opening on the background and revealing the light, if you want, revealing the light. And very often on the lake also, you will have a reflection of that lake. So this combination of a revelation of the sky and the dead trees, the abolition of forests, I would say this is very typical of Harris. I give you two other examples of that just to make my point clear. Here you have exactly the same type of composition. It's another things entitled Lake Superior, not dated, but probably of the same period of 1924, in which you have the same type of composition. In foreground, dead trees, then the lake, the sea, if you want, and then this illumination coming from the sky, and really almost structuring the whole image. You have this V shape of the trees, and as you see, the light also seems also to create this V shape. It comes from above all the time, and almost displays the two trees like this to make a kind of V shape like this. This is another one. The third one, again, Lake Superior number 3, if you want, 1928 this time, because what happened, Harris went back to this place many times. He started in 21 to be struck by this landscape, but then almost every year he went back to Lake Superior, different locality, Caldwell or elsewhere, and they're always being fascinated by this kind of primitive or very basic landscape, I would say. And then again, here I would say the trees are just vertical, and you see on each side you have stumps also. Not only they are dead, but you have also this, this idea that this forest have disappeared already. It's just have left some remnant. And behind, the revelation of the sky with probably kind of a suggestion of a morning light. If you see on the right side of the painting a little bit more light than in the left side where the little clouds are. This type of imagery, and you find many examples in Harris' work, is typical of Harris. You do find other painter of the group of 7 who seems to play with the same type of idea. Like, for instance, here with Frank Carmichael, a painting is entitled North Shore, Lake Superior. So obviously influenced by Harris, if you want, since it's 1927, this thing, in which at first sight I said, oh my God, this is the same thing. It's influenced by Harris, but look, you do have, of course, the dead trees in the foreground, but not at all the same type of landscape in the background. Here, in the contrary, you have hills covered with forest, and the sky is not so important. It's not the prevalent element in the picture. It's there, it's half covered and all that, but it's like an element among others. And you do have little lakes there that are source of life. And indeed, when Carmichael will, I would say, apprivoiser, comment on dirait ça? He will take this theme inside of his own world, if you want, when he will repeat it, the tree in the foreground will be a living tree, will not be dead anymore. So the previous painting, you could say, was influenced by Harris, but now this is him, this is what he likes to do. In the foreground, a living tree, a huge tree that give this kind of view in depth, and indeed in the background you don't even see the sky. Mind you, this is a detail only of the painting. I realize it by showing it here, but even if you saw the whole painting, the sky is just a little sliver on the left side there. It's a very reduced like this. And again, in the background, what you see, it's trees, it's living, it's full of life, and the water there is not there just to reflect the sky like in Harris, but have its own identity. And indeed, you could say this type of painting was parallel, or was, let's say, coherent with what the painting I was showing last time were proposing, like Tom Thomson, the West Wind, or the Jack Pine and all that, always with the same type of structure also, where you see a tree in the foreground, the lake, and then the sky. But the sky there, I would say, we are not so much in front of the sky, but more in front of wind or air, if you want. And that's why the water here is not reflecting really the sky. It has its own identity. It's different. In Harris, very often, the feeling you get is the water is there just to add even more this idea of emptiness and of immensity that you have there. So, and even in the, I would say, in the most successful Harris painting, you don't need anymore this device of dead trees in the foreground. This painting is here in this museum, so that's why I wanted to show it to you, so you can go after or before the course and to see it. Again, Lake Superior, the title are never too explicit. Circa 1925, and at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, in which, so you could say, in the most successful painting of Harris, he doesn't even need this foreground with the dead trees. You have just the sky, in a way, just the emptiness and the bigness of this landscape all the time. And he will make a lot of variation around this theme, with, for instance, with this little island that you will see in another picture also, and then always this kind of very dramatic sky. We don't know if there are mountains or clouds. We are like in between. And even there, if you don't see much of the sky, you have such a reflection on the lake that you understand that this above, you see, should be very bright and very, very beautiful. So you have my Vico opposition between, if you destroy the forest, you reveal the sky. And indeed, I will come back to the subject, but let's say the religious idea of Harris will be very important in his development and could explain this type of choice that he made there. Of course, he didn't come right away to this type of picture. Now I want to go back and to retrogress and try to show you how he went to this type of picture. It was not immediate. And in a way, you could say that the first work of Harris were completely to the opposite of that. He was a painter of urbanscape, in fact, not at all a landscape without anybody and without any personage and all that. He was representing very often, like here in this picture, it's called Winter Twilight of 1911. He was representing facade of houses like this, maybe sometimes with one personage, sometimes with not too much, but definitively all these works were done in the city, in Toronto, for this one. And Winter Twilight is at the Hamilton Art Gallery, and it's, as I told you, a painting of 1911. We know that Harris went to Berlin to study for about a period of 4 years. He was exposed there to, like you see in books always, he had a solid academic formation. Habitually, when the art historians say that, it is because it has no interest to explain his development. This is the worst thing it can happen to you as a painter, to have a solid academic formation, you see, because then you have to get rid of it and all that. But anyway, but he had this because indeed his professor at the time are completely unknown. One name that seems to float a little bit above, but it was not one of his teachers, Lieberman, who was a painter who, by the way, painted very often scene like this, you see, with houses and this type of composition. Maybe Harris took it from him and bring back this in Canada. Arriving in 1907 in Canada after a stage of studies of about 4 years in Berlin, he did a little bit of landscape paintings in the Laurentian, but right away he went to Toronto and then became interested in this type of picture here that you see. Some of them are depicting also houses who seems less, I would say, more poor than the one I was presenting just before. But it's again the same type of presentation. You have trees, you have the facade of the houses in the back, and you can have a little bit of street in the foreground. Like we know that these pictures, this one is called Houses Chestnut Street, were done in what is called the ward. The ward in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, is a kind of a worker area where you have a kind of a poorer section of the population. A lot of immigrants also were living there. And these people were basically workers going to their different factories or things. So he was maybe a little bit voyeuristic, I would say, because, as you know, Harris was a very wealthy man. His parents were owners of this famous firm, Massey Harris. All these tractors that you see all over Canada, you know, you don't have a farmer without a Massey Harris tractor. So they made a lot of money, and Harris, in fact, never had to make a living by himself. And not only that, he was very generous to the group of 7 themselves. He organized, as you know, the studio in Toronto, and also very often pay their trip in Algoma or wherever they wanted to go. He was behind this. Jackson says, he says, without Harris, we would not have group of 7 at all. I could imagine, yes, indeed. Financially, this was true. And also spiritually, he was like their kind of leader in the group. So maybe there was some voyeuristic aspect there because he's dealing with the poorer section of Toronto. He looked at it from far, in a way. And very often, it's like here. There's no personage whatsoever. It's like empty, like this. When there is, they are as inconspicuous as, I would say, a tree or an hydrant. You cannot guess what they are thinking. It doesn't seem to be too socially oriented. Even when you paint things like this, this subject matter could be closer to the working place, let's say. It's called the gas work, and this is huge kind of silo like this that were close to the wharf in Toronto, and where they were producing gas, I guess, for heating, and then again, the houses are in the background. You have nobody in front, and you don't see any. It doesn't seem to have any worker involved in this. Is it to say that Harris was not at all interested in social issue? And you would say, no, it's not true. There is definitively some example of, I would say, a more social type of commitment on his part. These two pictures were done in 1921 during a trip that he made in New Scotia, and also in Newfoundland. And especially, he stopped in Nova Scotia. Well, what I'm speaking of New Scotia, j'avais Nouvelle-Écosse ici. Okay, Nova Scotia, okay. And he went to Halifax, and he saw the slums of Halifax at the time. That was a kind of misery. It's almost like Angela Ashes, I would say, the way it's depicted. He saw misery that he had no idea in Toronto, you see. He was very, very moved and shocked by this. And indeed, if you think of the date, you see 21, you are in Canada at the time, at the beginning of, I would say, a more social awareness among workers. And for instance, in 1919, just a few years before that, you have a famous strike in Winnipeg, for instance, a general strike of workers. It's the beginning of the worker movement and all that. So you cannot depict things like that being completely neutral, let's say. He was certainly referring to a thing that he saw that moved him, and he wanted to be a witness of this aspect of life. We think he was there during the early spring, let's say, of 1921 because of the subject matter. As you see on the left side, this one on the left side is called Elevator Court. Court, of course, meaning this little alley in which, a little bit like in Angela Ashes, you have the description of this court you see in the novel. Okay, this one is called Elevator Court, Halifax, 1921, and the other one is Black Court. It's just the name of this little street with houses, and you do have a little bit of people on the right side there, and both, as I told you, were done in 1921. The one on the left belongs to Art Gallery of Ontario, the one on the right to the National Gallery in Ottawa. But they were done, they were the, let's say, they reflect the impact that this vicinity in Halifax had on him at the time. The fact that there was some social consciousness on the side of Harris there was noticed at the time by critics and also even by Jackson himself. He says he saw in them a sharp protest that there should be such dismal poverty in a land so bountiful as ours. And this interest in social issue, I would say, in Harris culminated in 1925, and it's expressed here in this picture, was called Miners' Houses, Glasby. Well, Glasby, and this was done in 1925, And in 1925, then you have real action there in Glaze Bay. There was these miners were, let's say, in discussion with a huge company. It was called the BESCO for British Empire Steel Company. So that they were miners of iron, and it's one kind of iron plant. And the company decided to reduce their salary to 10%, and also to cut a system that they had, that the family had, of credit. You see, the family could have some money in advance and could be credited like this to survive during the difficult time. And by cutting this stipends and cutting the salaries, there was suddenly hunger there, and there was a big revolt. There was violence and all that. And not only by showing that, let's say, these miners' houses like this, very shanty, very small, on the rocks like this, a kind of horrible place to live in, and all packed like this. Not only Harris painted that, but also wrote an article in Canadian Forum. Canadian Forum was a kind of leftist journal at the time, and in which he denounced the company, the BESCO company, and in which he took the side of the worker, all that. Okay, this, I could agree with this and all that, but then if you look at the picture, you have a feeling that I'm not sure that Harris is completely at ease with the situation. He's a rather conservative type of mind. You will see by his evolution and all that. And, he feels the injustice of these miners, but he's not sure that he's ready for the violence that is coming with it. And indeed, you could compare this picture to as if the houses were coming toward us. You see, like a little bit, when I look at this, there's a kind of Walt Disney quality to it. I thought of Fantasia and the Sorcerer Apprentice of Paul Dukas. You see, boom, 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 they are coming toward us, and maybe they will invade our space and all that. So I'm not sure at all that he was completely on the side of the worker there. He was also anxious about the type of violence that could develop in that. And indeed, you have at the time some reflection of some of his friends, let's say, and in particular of Fred Hauser, H-O-U-S-S-E-R, Fred Hauser. Hauser was the first man who wrote a book about the Group of Seven. And he was also a good friend of Harris. They were quite close together, to the point that finally Harris will divorce and will marry the wife of Hauser. This I call friendship, you know. And to the dismay of the Toronto good people of the establishment there, they maintained good relation together after this affair. Anyway, so Hauser, but most important, Hauser was a theosophist. And you do have a comment about, let's say, I just go back to this, of Hauser about this picture done in Halifax, that I want to quote to you because you will see, I think it explains why suddenly this type of involvement of Harris with social issue, finally he withdraw from that and went to the type of painting I was showing you in the beginning, where there's no people involved, where divinity is coming from above, and as if suddenly all the problem could be solved only by God and not by political action or by social action, things like that. And the quotation of Hauser I want to tell you is a comment of these two pictures, and he says, superficial idealists have been shocked by Harris Halifax canvases. We are confronted to a brutal subject matter, but painted with such humanity that it's not difficult to feel the painter's emotion. Such intense transposition of the subject could not be possible without the artist having been greatly moved by it. But what is important, it was followed. It is clear that he was aware of the spiritual poverty of the greatest part of humanity, unable to realize that it possessed the spiritual resources to overcome the life condition of black court. Whoa, This is, to me, I just thought, reading this, I said, okay, Karl Marx, come to my rescue. Religion is the opium of people. And the theosophy, in a way, is a kind of escapist ideology that you get, say, the problem could live in dismal condition, but what they need, these poor guys, it's a spiritual enlightenment and all that. You see, it will solve all their problems if they can't be theosophists like us. Well, this, of course, you see, I caricature a little bit, but I think this is what suddenly moved Harris out of this type of subject matter and could bring something, something else. I go back to what I was showing you, this picture, and because Hauser noticed something else also. Not only, he says, the subject matter is moving and all that, but also the style of Harris is changing. If you remember the city picture that I just showed you before, they were painted with a kind of rather heavy impasto. With with some painterliness in it. And habitually, when you have this in a picture, it's a way for the artist to show that he's present, that he's involved with the subject matter, because in a way, it leaves traces of his hand. It is kind of a direct contact with what you see on the picture, as if the painter was there, in a way. And with this picture, and what will follow after in Harris, suddenly this kind of painterliness, this heavy impastos or these traces of the brushes are more and more subdued. And instead of that, you have a kind of film. I would say we pass from, let's say, oily substance to formica. Suddenly, all this becomes very thinly applied type of picture, and also volumes are more important than just flatness like we had before. Now you have really things in a 3 dimension, let's say. Well, I was suggesting they are advancing toward us, but the way the picture is built is really 3-dimensional. And this was noticed also by Fred Hauser that I was mentioning before. He continued the text I was quoting by saying that with this picture, Harris, we can notice abandonment of the decorative 2-dimensional design for that of a solid 3-dimensional form and restrained color. It is as if at the moment when Harris becomes to feel more emotionally involved with the subject matter here, he felt the need to be more detached in a way, to have a kind of treatment of the picture in which the presence of the painter is no more felt. As if all these brushes action and all these traces of the brush now have to be erased, have to be put aside. For Hauser, he saw there, again I quote him, a quality of his philosophical idealism and more emotionally considered surface. I'm not sure with these last things, you see that it's more emotionally expressed surface, more control. Emotionally, yeah, there's more control there than there was before. And I think he felt if I go too far in that direction, we will end up in a mess in violence and all that. So he withdraw from that. And what he's offering basically to the poor guys who live in this thing, it's a certain conception of beauty, a certain conception of the divinity through beautiful thing, like he says, each new experience of beauty, each improvement of our own perception bring us to renew and enrich our knowledge of the universe, which is by essence ordained and full of beautiful things, and to realize up to a point of our own divinity. So this theosophic type of speech will take over and will finally express itself in landscape painting. But there's another element to that also, and which is, to my mind at least, more ambiguous even. When all these action, or this social action was happening at the time, the government tried to diffuse the problem by encouraging people to think that part of the problem, if not all their problem, come from immigration. There was a lot of talk about immigrants taking our jobs and thinking that's why we have to strike and all this. As if instead of facing, of course, the real problem, you put them on the back of the immigrant and you see this is the cause of all the problem. And then you could ask yourself, okay, what is all with theosophists about that? Then I found a text that I want you to listen carefully because you will see, like me, probably your hairs will raise. Again, of this Fred Hauser, that I repeat, was a good friend of Harris, very close to him also, who have a comment about this, about the immigrant and about theosophy. You see how it goes. So I read it to you. It's a little bit long, but anyway, follow well the argumentation. You will see it's a little bit weird. You see, wherever one goes in Canada, he hears talks about immigration. There is an impatient haste to get the country filled up. We are told it is our greatest need. Perhaps so. From an economic standpoint, it cannot be denied. From a spiritual standpoint, it may be another question. And from now, listen carefully, because here it's become more bizarre. Theosophically, we have to regard the American continent as a unit. Canada's function in the growth of North American civilization seems to be to feed special food to the more rapidly growing United States. Okay? Let's sell them our blueberries. Huh? Okay. Millions of our best minds have migrated to the southern country to offset the spiritual effect of the influx there of European immigration and help all the weight of equilibrium on the side of North America. Have you ever seen the Canadian missionary? You see, going to the States to balance the immigration coming from Europe in the States. So this is really something. And Canada is performing an important part in providing elements of a new world character and outlook where they are in danger of being overwhelmed. You understand the type of reasoning you have there? Huh? We are here very pure. Right? We have no problem. But our neighbors of the South are terribly mixed up because they get all these European immigrants since 50 years. And our aim in life, our destiny, let's say, is to immigrate there to counterbalance the influence of all these Europeans coming to America. This is theosophically what Hauser says. And he concludes, had this country been invaded by swarm, notice the words there, they are terrible, invaded by swarm of all world people, as the state has been in the past 50 years, we would have been incapable of performing this task. So then you have this other issue, this other dimension of the problem, not only like I said at the beginning, the forest being destroyed to reveal the divinity and all that, and being like the solution to all problems. You see beauty, order in the universe. But you have also suddenly this overtone that the heterogeneity of any culture, let's say the fact that there's many people, many culture and all that, is resented in a way. We don't need this. We need to have one type, and of course, the immigrant that will swarm United States, the one he speaks of are the Italians, are the Jews, are the Polish, are the Russian, are the black people, the Chinese. So you just think of the history of the time, even in Canada also, and that's what he means. And recently, the geographer was called Brian Osborne was quoting. I don't know who he is, John Parkin, maybe some of you know who he is. He wrote a stupid book, anyway, it's called, there is stupid book, yes. Imperial Federalism, the Problem of National Unity, in which he advanced the idea that the unity of Canada will be done by its climate. He said, it's so cold here that nobody will want to come except us, you see. And in particular, he says the black people will not come, and what he called, I quote because it's not nice, is the Italian organ grinder. And as a French Canadian, I feel closer to Italian organ grinder than to this Parkin, I can tell you anyway. But and I don't know by what argument, which kind of mind he had, but he says this climate, this cold climate, is also will foster progress, the democratic spirit, and yeah, I guess because we cannot speak, we're all frozen, of course, and high and powerful form of civilization. Well, we still look for it, but anyway, okay. Well, so that means, I quote this Parkin, stupid and ridiculous, because in a way it echoes a little bit the prose, much more florid and much more theosophic of Hauser. And you see that this idea of climate is there. In the text of Hauser, there's one more phrase that I have to quote, in which also he doesn't allude directly to the climate, but at least to the landscape. And why? Because this is what makes the Canadian pure. The fact that they live in a landscape so void and so empty and so virgin and whatever, pristine if you want, that this have giving us this North American flavor that we could bring down to the South. He says, in that splendid loneliness, that spacious power of the skies, again, and the pervading northern overtone, one experienced glorious release from the bustle, fuss, and fumes of great and settled country. And, okay, you would say, well, this is very nice, but this is Hauser. Harris didn't share this idea. Well, not exactly, but what I found in, because these two guys were written in a magazine which was called the Canadian Theosophist. It's very hard to find, it's not easy, it's not in every library. But anyway, their texts are known. And Harris wrote an article in which he saw not so much the influence of people themselves, but of art. Meaning the fact that we are painting in the northern country should make our art completely different from the one from the south, from the American art. And again, this is this idea that we are living, he says, close to a source of spiritual flow that will shed clarity in the growing race of America. But through art, through the type of production will be. And he concludes, we were not placed between the southern teeming of men and the ample replenishing north for nothing. Meaning that the fact that we are here in the north, we can produce an art who is special, who is different, and could influence the people in the south. And this, I think, is expressed in one of the most famous Lawren Harris picture that probably you have seen reproduced, that you receive in postcards and things all over the world. And, okay, it's entitled North Shore, again, Lake Superior. So, again, it's the same type of source of inspiration that I was mentioning before at the beginning of the lecture. This one is 1926, and it's indeed at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa, where the North Shore, Lake Superior, 1926. It has been done, there is a kind of sketch that just precedes that, who is very, very similar to the finished painting, who have been entitled The Old Stump, of course, because of the subject matter. You see it in the foreground here. And with all the elements that I was mentioning before, the dead tree in the foreground, the shimmering sky, and the lake also that reflected, and all the rays coming from above always on this tree. Robert Lindsley, I've made, well, the most I can say, a very astonishing type of comment about this. He says that the lake represents the immigration, the flow of people coming, and you have in front of that the affirmation of a fascist affirmation of the Canadian, you say, resist this flows coming. Mind you, okay, I don't go as far as that, but he based his thing on certain imagery of Harris about this flow of people coming. I quote what he quotes a little bit. All the channels of cultural barter flow to us from other countries, other times. At times, indeed, we seem like a low receptive reservoir into which pours the chaos of ages, the mixed concord and discord of many varied people, and until we clean this reservoir. See, you have a little bit of maybe not ethnic cleansing, but you have the theme of cleansing there. We will remain a confused people. Of course, most of this flooding from older sources is the continuance of a flow that was inevitable and necessary to us until comparatively recently. But nevertheless, he says we should clean this, we should be, to be ourselves, we should resist to all this invasion of European ideas and European people coming from outside. So that's where Lindsay finds his inspiration and all that. I think if we go back and if you try to put it in a kind of art historical context, you will see that the painting is built like, for instance, this famous picture of Caspar David Friedrich, which is called Das Wanderer über dem Nebelmeer. I'm risking my German here. I have a German-French here. It will just give me a spank after. But it means the wanderer above the misty sea, above the sea of clouds, if you want. Der Wanderer über dem Nebelmeer, the sea of clouds. And you see there, I think it's explicit in a way that the trees in Harris' picture is like a representation of the self, of somebody looking at the landscape and being inspired by it, in a way. You have the same type of construction in many symbolist painters at the time, like, for instance, Ferdinand Hodler, who was a Swiss painter of the time. Again, the same idea. You see a man standing facing us this time. In Friedrich, I think it's more subtle because since he turned his back from us, he asked us to participate in the same type of contemplation that he's doing. It's as if he brings you in the picture. Here it's facing us, but behind him again, you have the same type of sea of clouds like this. So at first, if you make these comparison, I think we can say, okay, I'm sorry. I think I will go back to this. It's more closer to it. And you could say, okay, maybe what Harris suggests, it is that man is like in front of this nature, and if he open himself to this type of landscape, he will receive this kind of revelation from above, from the sky, destroying, say, no more forest, we don't need it, no more mingle of population, all that. We are just in front of the sky, and like he described this kind of experiment that you could have there. He says the bodily effect of the very coolness and clarity of its air, the feel of soil and rocks, like it in the foreground, the rhythm of its hills and the roll of its valleys, from its clear skies, great waters, endless little lakes, stream and forests, from snows and horizon of swift silver. All this, when you are in front of this type of landscape, you feel all this, he says. These move into man's whole nature and evolve a growing, living response that melts his personal barrier. So I think this is very important because what he described there is a kind of, I would say, almost a mystical type of experience in which you get decentered. You are no more at the center. You are no more a self. You get dissolved in the spectacle that you are in front. You are like just swallowed by it, and you don't exist. It's a kind of an experience of depersonalization. Like if you were suddenly no more aware of yourself in that. That intensify his awareness and project his vision through appearances to the underlying hidden reality. You go beyond the appearances and you are suddenly in this hidden reality, which you could describe as the being or the divinity or a kind of spiritual type of entity like this. When authors speak of depersonalization, of, like he says, the melting of personal barrier, you have to be always a little bit on your guard, because this is indeed not only things that you can experiment alone in front of a landscape, but also in a crowd. And also eventually in a fascist crowd also, where eventually nobody have any person are just shouting in the same direction. So this type of ambiguity can come. And you have, I would say, in Harris, always this idea of this experience is so basic and so fundamental for him that everything else are more or less annoying and should be removed. In a text that he wrote in 1938, again, in this Canadian Theosophist, in this magazine, he explained that humanity is governed by 4 types of laws. He says, well, first of all, the real laws that we have to obey, let's say the things that are in the civil code, let's say. And he says you have also what he called moral codes, and then ethics, and finally aesthetic. 4 of them, he says. Okay, the laws of the land, if you want, the things that we follow, the moral codes, and ethics, well, anything dealing with morality, and finally aesthetic. And okay, the laws, he doesn't comment much. He says, okay, this is people have to obey the law, and what can we do? We cannot really discuss it. Ethic, he says, this is great because it's rational. You could discuss about ethical matter. For instance, today, indeed, we have biomedical, bioethics, people discussing about many problems that were not solved before and that we're facing with, and trying to do it rationally. He says, on this I have no issue. But he says, with moral codes, they are the cause of the big division of people. I think I can say with Harris, you have this idea that the unity of people could be obtained if they were open to nature. And the worst thing that can happen is they become to discuss at the level of culture. We should abolish culture because there are our division. We should be open to nature only, and then all our problems will be solved. What he called the moral codes there are, he says, they varied in different ages and in different places. I think it's more or less what we could call kind of cultural habits of each little group, you see. I think what he called moral codes, in fact, it will be some practice that you have, let's say, in French Canada and that you don't have in Anglo-Canada. Say, everything that could divide the people by a little, say, we like beans, you don't, and things like that. Say, we like sirop d'érable and we go with ceinture fléchée and you don't. Say, all these type of it is very different ages and different places and with different people. And habitually, they are dictated by general self-interest or expediency, personal and possessive, dogmatic and inelastic. And he opposed to that aesthetic. For him, aesthetic, in the contrary, will create unity, will not divide people like that. It will be so general and so universal that everybody could agree on beauty, let's say. He says aesthetic is the life of the soul. It is an attitude which discloses the memory of the divine in us, or even that put man above laws, above all codes, all creeds, all dogma, all formula of living, all assistance from scholarship, all earthly comfort and props. And indeed, in a way, there is behind this idea that the aesthetic experience is universal. Yeah? And if you let's say, attacked him on this and said, no, it's not true. Some people define beauty in a way and others differently. The Greek, for instance, have a certain canon of beauty that we don't agree with today, and we change. Every culture have his own. Some culture likes to put long earrings, others not. If we can be more relativistic about beauty, right away Harris will brush this off. He says, no, the real experience of beauty arouses the same kind of feeling, the similar impulse to devotion and a desire of constant harmony of being prevail in all people. So that could be then, for him, the solution to this division, you see, that I was mentioning, and will be suddenly the possibility of a kind of unity. And I think it explains also why Harris, of all the group, let's say, was not very interested in visiting Quebec. You will say, maybe I'm preaching a little bit for my parish, but you have other examples. For instance, Jackson and Lismer, les moyens idiomes manuels. Jackson on the left side, I think it's flipped, but anyway, and Lismer on the right side, they thought that as national painter, they should visit all Canada. They should not be just in the north or just in the west coast and things like that, but they should see all part of Canada. And let's see, this little painting of Jackson is called Morning Kakuna. Well, Kakuna is a small place on north of Quebec City, you see, on the north shore, if I'm not mistaken. I should know, well, part of my family come from there, but I don't know. And anyway, it's a little place up north there, after Baie-Saint-Paul and all this region. They were fascinated by the Charlevoix region, in which you had a kind of, for them, it was almost like the Pont-Aven of Gauguin, you see. It was like going to a place where the people kept the old usage of Quebec and all that, and so they were fascinated by that. And Lismer did this picture, of which there is two versions. This one is at Kingston in the Agnes Terrington Art Center of 1926, and it's called Quebec Village. In fact, we know which village it is. It's Saint-Hilarion. Saint-Hilarion is near Baie-Saint-Paul. I don't know if you see more or less. Again, in Charlevoix County. And I oppose that to the point of view of Harris in the way that with Jackson and Lismer, you have an interest in not only nature, but also in culture. In the difference of different culture that makes Canada. And there's no, they see, in the contrary, that their aim was to depict all the aspects, all the different facets, let's say, of the Canadian landscape, and not just to concentrate on one big idea. You see the sky and with this kind of theosophic approach that you have there. And to conclude the first part of my lecture, I go back to a famous painting of Harris from the North Shore, Lake Superior, again, of 1927, which is in London, this picture. It's in Regional Art and Historical Museum of London, Ontario, of course, not London, England. And so to summarize, I would say to this point, okay, you have in Harris' evolution, if you followed me the way I would present it, a kind of opposition between culture and nature to start with. These urban landscape at the beginning could be closer to a cultural approach, and then we shift to nature. But in nature, there's another division. You have an opposition between forest and sky. And this have two consequences, like I tried to show you. First, there was this kind of hatred of forests in a way, or no concern with the environment, with the ecology, because like a theosophist, he's interested by the revelation from the sky, so all the rest is a kind of a hindrance to this revelation. And also it's transposed socially, if you want, the kind of mixture of races, of cultures, and all that is also refused. We want unity, we want kind of unity through beauty. And when I was thinking of that, I says, is it possible that we could suddenly associate forest with humanity? Because habitually forest is always associated with wild, with savagery. But if you reverse the reasoning I'm doing, or if you take Vico seriously, could you say that forest, in the contrary, was a way to save humanity? Okay, this is the question mark. We'll stop here for 10 minutes. I will try to answer it in the second part of the lecture.